little bit about the subject that I teach, leadership, and then I'm going to switch gears and give you 4 or 5 pieces of advice that I guess I wish I had gotten when I was sitting in your shoes or when I've been in similar positions to you. And so let me talk a little bit first about leadership. So I've been now at Harvard Business School for, it's hard to believe, for close to 10 years. And you've all heard I left Goldman Sachs. First I took a leave of absence after 23 years there, and then I wound up staying here and becoming ultimately a professor. And when I first told people that I was a professor at Harvard Business School, and when I go around and tell people that, their first reaction is to be very impressed. Ooh, that's really cool that you're a professor at Harvard. When I tell them that I used to work at Goldman Sachs, they kind of go, ugh. And then they ask me, well, so, okay, so what do you teach? And I say, I teach leadership, very proudly. And then to that, they usually say, ugh, again. And I say, why the ugh? And they say, well, what is that? And I say, leadership. We talk about it all the time. What do you mean, what is that? I know what it is, but I don't think you can teach it. Can you teach leadership? Can you really learn to be a leader? Don't you have to be born as a leader? I've had people that have been students of mine at Harvard Business School, read my books, and then they come up to me and they say, they just have one more question to ask, and that is, can I really learn to be a leader? And I think, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. So everywhere I go, I've been asked this question: can I learn to be a leader? And what I started doing when I first got here is when I talked to groups of CEOs, I would do a little quiz, and I'd say, write down your definition of the word leadership. And people would write it down, and what I learned is people's definitions of the term leadership are all over the map. If I asked this group today to define leadership, you would find that there are 15 different definitions. There's no consensus in this room on what it is. Some of you think it's about articulating a vision and setting objectives and getting others to follow you, and that's about charisma, communication. I agree with that. Some of you say, nah, that's not what leadership is anymore. Some of you would say leadership means, in this world of empowerment and network communication and all that, leadership, it means serving people and creating an environment where they can do their best work. That's what leadership is. And I kind of agree with that. There's a third group of you that thinks something totally different. You have one question, and some of you may be like this. A number of OPMers have said this to me. Forget all this touchy-feely stuff. I've got one question for you. Are you making money? Is your business making money? If your business is making money, you're a good leader. If it's not making money, you're not a good leader. End of story. All this touchy-feely stuff you teach is great, but at the end of the day, leadership is about results. The problem with that definition is the magazines in this country and around the world are full of front-page people being honored as CEOs of the year when their business is going like this, and then 2 years later, when the business turns down, these same people are vilified as bums. And I come from an industry where the most frequent thing that happens, and I have to turn my microphone on, the most frequent result in a year before a company goes bankrupt is a record year. Record year, record year, record year, failure. And the CEOs go from being celebrated to being vilified. So my point in telling all this is there's enormous confusion in this world about what leadership is. And I realized that when I first got to Harvard after the first year or two. So I've tried to spend the last 8 or 9 or 10 years trying to demystify it. So I decided a long time ago, I'm sympathetic to all the little kids here today because I have a 1-year-old myself, which is about to turn 1, so I sympathize with what you're going through. Okay, so I'll just say that. What I've tried to do is I've decided 8 or 9 years ago that I can't do any more damage to the field than already exists, and I can't create any more confusion than already exists if I come up with my own definition of what leadership is. So here's what I think it is. And it's the basis, I would argue, for much of what we teach you at Harvard Business School. And so let me explain it the following way. Leadership starts with having an ownership mindset, okay? And what do I mean by that? You have to get yourself in the shoes, which for you all is easy because you are an owner, but put yourself in the shoes of the decision maker. And while a lot of people say they do that, very few people actually do that. The radio, the television, the political world is full of people who give their opinions, but it's not at all what they would do if they weren't an owner. And what do I mean by put yourself in the shoes of an owner? Think of all the different considerations and constituencies you have to think about. All the myriad of parties that have an interest in what you're thinking about. For you, shareholders, employees, your customers, the community, your family, you. And in addition, legal, ethical, economic considerations. And when you actually put yourself in the shoes of an owner, you'll realize that easy solutions or easy answers don't come so easily. Everything involves a trade-off when you put yourself in the shoes of an owner. But leadership requires to start with striving to have that mindset. With that mindset, there are 3 things you need to do, in my opinion, to be a leader. First, you have to, and they sound very simple, you have to figure out what you think should be done. What do you think should be done if you were an owner? What would I do if I were an owner? What would I actually do? For most of my life, I will tell you as a leader, the answer I honestly give most of the time is, I don't know. I haven't figured it out yet. I'm still agonizing over it. If for those who know me, if you see me walking around with my head like this and I'm thinking, that's often, usually I'm thinking about an issue. I don't know yet what I believe should be done. Leaders don't need to always have the answer to that question, but in my opinion, leaders need to be always striving to ask and answer that question. What do I think should be done as if I were an owner? Then every once in a while, you actually get conviction about what you think should be done. Leadership then requires a second thing, action. In those cases where you think you actually know what should be done, not all the time and not indiscriminately, you need to actually take action. That may be as simple as speaking up, or it may be as complicated as coming up with a very detailed plan of action where you have to influence people, you have to bring others on board, and you have to have a whole series of stage actions that you need to take. But the world is full of people who can tell you after the fact that you made a mistake. I can't tell you how many decisions I've made in my career where somebody comes up afterwards and says to me, let me tell you, I knew that was a mistake. I never would have done that. I never agreed with that. And you know, my reaction in those situations is to try to kill that person, suffocate them. But obviously I'm here, so I must not have done that, but in my mind, I'd like to kill them. And I say, why didn't you speak up? Why didn't you say something? Why didn't you do something? And they have a million reasons why they cannot act. Leaders find a reason and a way to act. Okay, so can you figure out what you believe and can you act? Leadership requires a third thing, and that is in a way that adds value to others. Leadership is not about how to do things that are simply good for you. The world is full of people who can figure out what they believe and act in a way that's good for them. Sadly, in my opinion, that is not leadership. Leadership, in my view, requires adding value to someone else, a customer, or a client, or a community, or some other constituency. Okay? Profit comes as a result of adding value over a sustained period of time. You want to build a small business? Focus on how to make money. You want to build a big business? Focus instead on how to add value that's distinctive over a sustained period of time. Then you're going to build a big business. Okay, so can you figure out what you believe? Can you act in a way that adds value to others with an ownership mindset? In my experience, great leaders, great organizations, great nonprofits, great for-profits, great anything are built around a nucleus of people who think and act that way. Now, for some of you, and I've talked to some of you, as owner-presidents, you think and act this way, but your problem is you believe your employees don't think and act this way. You feel like you're alone. Gee, no one cares as much about this business as I do. Why can't I get people who care as much as I do? One of the things a leader needs to do is create an environment that empowers your people to think and act like owners. Leadership is not something you're going to be able to do by yourself. The world is way too complicated. And so part of the challenge for many owner-presidents, and one of the things I think we help you with, I hope we do when you leave here, is it's not enough for you to act like a leader. You have to create an environment where your people think and act like owners. Then you're building something powerful. Now, by this definition, you don't need to manage anybody. You don't need to manage anybody to be a leader. Or, conversely, you could manage 50,000 people and not be a leader at all. And by the way, I think a lot of the disgruntlement about leaders in our world today is we see our big institutional leaders and we think they're not acting like owners. They're not focused on adding value. We get very disappointed with that. The best story I've heard about leadership, just to explain what I'm talking about, I was giving a speech in Wilmington, Delaware, for a new book I wrote, and I was talking to 500 people, and they had a grade school principal introduce me to an audience, and this grade school principal had gotten to know me a little bit and read some of the things I've written, and the grade school principal got up there and told a story about a janitor in her school who a few weeks earlier had seen a 6-year-old child wet his pants. This is the story she's telling to introduce me to this crowd. I don't know where she's going with this. But she tells a story about a 6-year-old child. The janitor sees a 6-year-old child wet his pants. The janitor took it upon himself, even though it was not his job description, to find a teacher. Together, they took this 6-year-old child. They apparently had a change of clothes in the back. They found a way to clean this child up, get him changed, because they made the judgment that sending this child home with his pants wet would be very humiliating and demoralizing and traumatic for this kid. And they said, we're not going to let that happen. So they got the child cleaned up, changed, back into class, and the janitor went back to his job. As soon as she finished the story, I hated to actually get up and speak in front of this audience because that's as good a leadership story as you're ever going to hear. Because I don't know much about the janitor, but that janitor acted like a leader. Decided what he believed, acted in a way that added value to that 6-year-old kid, even though I had nothing in it for him. And I'm pretty sure that that grade school principal, she's a leader because she created an environment where that janitor, who's probably the most junior person in the whole organization, that janitor knew he was empowered to think and act like an owner. So as you leave here, leave Harvard, I would say to all of you, are you creating an environment in your organization that empowers people to think and act like owners in a way that adds value? I think that may be the biggest challenge all of us, including me, have in being leaders of organizations. It's not enough for you to do it. Okay, so why do leaders fail, by the way? Why might you fail? And I used to think, gee, maybe because you're not smart enough, or a lot of people would say, oh, gee, I don't have enough charisma. No. By the way, on that issue of can you learn to be a leader, I have not yet met a successful leader who did not have to learn. If you find one, good luck. I haven't met one yet who did not have to learn. And I don't care, it's all the way from the President of the United States. And by the way, I would argue if you're the smartest person in your organization or in your class, and you always had the answer, I think it may be tougher for you to learn. If you think leadership is about having all the answers, I think you're going to have a problem. Leadership is about asking the right questions. Are you confident enough to say, I don't know, I need your advice, I was wrong? How many of you say that? I was wrong. I changed my mind. Some of you here, and I've met some superb people, I could put a loaded gun to their head, they cannot say those words. I was wrong. Here's another one. I'm sorry. I apologize. I made a mistake. There are some people they cannot do it. And if you can't do it, I would say you're going to have a problem. Because leadership, I have found, and the reason people fail to reach their leadership potential is an inability to learn. If you think you need to have all the answers, you need to be the smartest person in the room, good luck. That is not a sign of confidence. When you go to that cocktail party, and there's somebody who seems so confident and they've got the answer to every question, and they want to show you how smart they are, that's not a sign of confidence in my opinion. That's a sign, I think, of insecurity. Leadership is about being confident enough to admit what you don't know, seek help, advice. And what goes with an inability to learn is isolation. And for owner-presidents, this is the biggest problem I've seen with OPMers. When you're the owner and you hold all the marbles and you're in charge, there's a huge power asymmetry between the boss and the subordinates. And by the way, unless someone is suicidal, they're not going to do something to make you upset with them. Because you write the checks. If I want to work at your company, I'm stuck with you. If you're the kind of person that does not like to be disagreed with, I'm not going to disagree with you, I assure you. And so what happens is, for OPMers in particular, you become very isolated. If you do not ask questions, seek advice, show you're open to learning, you will become isolated. And what do I mean by isolation? It means everybody knows there's a problem, everybody but you. Everybody has blind spots. All of us have blind spots. You don't know what you don't know. Okay? Your socks don't match. You pick the wrong shoes, they don't match. The shoes don't match your back. I'm thinking things that I do. You got a big stain on your shirt. Everybody knows it but you. Do you create an environment where people are willing to tell you? And for some of you, you do, and some of you, you do not. Inability to learn, isolation, discomfort with vulnerability. The reason for many people that they can't ask questions and admit they don't know, and they become isolated, is asking a question or admitting you don't know something makes you feel weird, uncomfortable, weak. I've had people come up to me after the speech and they say, your advice, Rob, is the stupidest advice I have ever heard. Stupid, Rob. Thought you were supposed to be smart. Or at least some said you were smart. If I asked questions like you said, I would go from here to here. I can't do that. You crazy? And I have to say to them, I might be crazy, but I will tell you, if you can't ask a question, I assure you, and you walk around and you don't know what you don't know, you will certainly go from here to here. It is a sign of strength to ask questions, but a lot of people, it doesn't feel good, they don't like it. And so I would argue leadership is very much like going on a diet, which all of us have done, or trying to get in shape. You've got to work at it. So you've been to Harvard Business School for 9 weeks. And for those in the families of the OPMers, some of you, I sympathize with you because you get these OPMers back and they're going to change everything. They'll tell you all this stuff they learned. But the reality is, what you've learned at Harvard Business School is nothing more than a start. It's like going on a diet for 3 weeks, then 3 weeks, then 3 weeks for getting in shape. If you go back to eating what you used to eat, or you don't exercise, you're going to get out of shape again. All we've done, I think, at Harvard Business School is give you tools to get you started. What happens from here will not matter at all what happened at Harvard Business School during these 9 weeks. It'll matter what you do now. Are you willing to work at it? And the main thing I think I've tried to do as a professor at Harvard Business School is, in effect, give people permission to admit, I don't know everything. You gotta work at it. It's okay to ask a question. It's okay to seek advice. It's necessary. You need help. And I think if you do that, you're going to find it's a lot easier to figure out what you believe, act in a way that adds value, and I believe if you do that, you will be a leader. Or you will make a lot more progress being a leader. So that's my leadership spiel. How's that? Spiel. And so let me just close in maybe the last 10 or 15 minutes, give you some 4 or 5 pieces of advice that I guess I try to keep track of 4 or 5 things I wish somebody had told me, and it took me a long time to figure out. So here's what it is. And just to give you a little background, I've got a couple of friends here. I've got my friend Michael Diamond from Kansas, Heather Hendrickson, who runs sustainability for Harvard, by the way, who's also a longtime friend. And whenever I'm at these graduations, I can't help but think back to my own graduation, long time ago. That literally 25, 30 years ago, Linda mentioned that I graduated here in '83. Let me tell you what everybody knew was true when I sat where you sat graduating from Harvard Business School. These are things that we were certain of. Just so you know, I won't take the things we wondered about. These are the things we were certain of. Japan would dominate the world economically for the rest of our lives. That was a certainty, okay? You guys, some of you are old enough to remember that. If you want to get ahead in business, you probably need to learn about Japan, and learning Japanese is probably not a bad idea. But whatever you could do to mimic what Japan did, and for those of you from Japan, and I lived in Japan, by the way, myself for 5 years, you know, we talk a lot about this, but that was a done deal. US and the rest of the world were going to decline versus Japan. Second, inflation and interest rates would always be above 10%. Okay, in the United States, at least, in the Western world. And it was unthinkable to ever have low rates again. Just wasn't going to happen. Sorry. For the United States people, which we were heavily US-centric back in '83, Watergate. Any of you remember Watergate? How many of you have heard of Watergate? All right, so still all right. We were sure after the trauma of Watergate, there was never going to be another big government scandal again. Because it was so traumatic. I mean, there's no way. We've learned our lesson, never going to happen again. We had never heard at that time, believe it or not, of Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, global warming and climate change. If you heard of it, I hadn't. There was no internet, really wasn't. No one had a profile on Facebook, by the way. If you wanted to read a paper, you held it in your hand. Most cities, by the way, had a morning and an afternoon edition, which we thought you couldn't do without. And by the way, if you want to talk with someone, you did it face-to-face or by telephone. And if you really had a lot of energy, like you want to write your grandparent or something, you did the big thing, which, I mean, you had to think twice about this. You wrote a letter. But that was a lot of work, so we didn't do that very often. Those were your 3 options. It was a lot easier to talk on the phone or in person. So I say these things because we all know that things did not quite turn out the way we thought. And by the way, that holds for today, though. The things you are certain of today, the only thing I know for certain, I don't know how it's going to turn out, but it's not going to turn out the way we think. I wound up going, as you heard, to Goldman Sachs. I spent 23 years there after I graduated. I wound up taking a leave of absence and being a professor at Harvard Business School, something I never thought I would do. No way. Write a book? Forget it. Write 3 books? No way. Go do what I'm about to do with the Fed? I mean, you wouldn't even think of it. So with that background, let me give you 5 or 6 pieces of advice that I wish somebody had told me, you know, way back then. Number 1, take ownership of your life. And for many of you, you say, isn't it late for me to do that? No, it's never too late. You're just getting started. Take ownership. And what does that mean? Number one, I would argue still for each of you, including me, by the way, write down on a piece of paper your strengths and your weaknesses. That's it. Can you accurately do that? For most of us, we can't, including me. Why? Because the world is always changing. Your job is always changing. And the worst part is you need to cultivate people who care enough about you to tell you things you don't want to hear. And for all the other presidents in this room, you have a particular problem in this, because when you walk in the office, you're like, God has entered for some of you. And you like that, by the way. Let's not kid ourselves. You love that, okay? And by the way, that's why the first week or two of OPM, and we always laugh about this, there are certain people, raise your hand, forget it. Nah, I'll just talk whenever I want. Because in my company, I talk whenever I want. And the people like me say, no, gotta raise your hand. Ugh, no. But the fact of the matter is, one of the things I think you've learned here at HBS, I hope, is you've cultivated in your learning group, you've cultivated people who tell you things you may not want to hear. Try to bring that back to your company, because it's the only way you're going to figure out your strengths and weaknesses. So when I say act like an owner, that includes about understanding yourself. Do you know your strengths and weaknesses? Keep track of them. My experience is the biggest reason most of us struggle to reach our potential is not because we don't want to, is we don't know what we don't know, and we don't realize we have a weakness. When you finally realize it, you usually do something about it, almost always. But for most of us, you don't know. And once it hits you, you'll do something. Second, don't be afraid to dream your dream. Now, for many of you, your dream was to start a company or to run the company you're running. But I know enough OPMers to know many of you are thinking about doing something different than what you've done, and you feel trapped. You wouldn't think owner-presidents feel trapped, right? But I've learned owner-presidents feel trapped sometimes. Don't be afraid to dream your dream. Not your family's dream, not your parents' dream, not your friend's dream, your own dream. Think about when you were at your best in your career. What were you doing? What did you love? When did you feel great? Think about that. It's not too late. And how does it fit with what you're doing now? Your dream from here may be weird, and your friends may all laugh at it, but it might be fantastic and it might change the world. You've got great ability to do the most important things that you're going to be known for in your career. May not be what you came in here with. It may be the thing you do next. Don't be afraid to dream your dream and figure out what you do next that you love. I already talked about leadership. I do think if you want to reach your potential, it's the same definition of being a leader. Figure out what you believe as if you were an owner. Act in a way as if you were an owner, and add value to someone else. If you relentlessly do those three things, I think you got a heck of a chance to reach your potential. Money, again, I'll say it again, is an outcome that comes as a result of adding value over a sustained period of time. If your business is based around how to make money or how to make numbers, my guess is you are losing focus on the most important thing, which is how to add value that's distinctive. Why do businesses fail? Is because in the zeal to make money, the world changes, and instead of focusing on how it's changing, you focus on how to make money. Focus instead on the customer. How to serve them in a way that's distinctive. If it's the same way you did it 5 years ago, I think you're already going to have a problem. It's got to keep evolving, and you need your people to figure this out, and you need to be talking to customers to figure this out. I don't think you can do this alone. I've already talked about it, but I'd say it again. You've got to be open to learning. And I'll say these things again. How often do you say, I was wrong, I changed my mind, I don't know? That's a good one. I'd like your advice. Don't let your ego get in the way of learning. And the worst thing you can do, you've now been to Harvard. Some of you, I hope not many, but some of you may think, now I'm really a big shot. I went to Harvard, so I'm supposed to know everything now. No, wrong lesson from Harvard. The most impressive thing you could do in your community when you go back is to be humble, ask questions, seek advice, respect others more. That'll reflect well on you, and by the way, it'll reflect well on Harvard. People who wonder what we're teaching here, they might want to come here also. But don't be afraid to ask a question and then listen. I think one of the reasons you liked it here so much is the most important skill, my guess is you practiced here for the last number of weeks, is your listening skills. I think you guys dramatically improved, and that takes a lot of work. Relationships matter. And I mean people you can confide in and get advice from. Networking is great, but it's not the same as a relationship. Mutual trust, mutual respect, and mutual understanding. That's a relation. You don't need to like the person. They don't need to be your best friend. You don't need to want to have drinks with them. But you need to have people you trust, respect, and who you understand and they understand you. And how do you do that? Share information about yourself. Self-disclosure. Ask questions. Seek advice. And for most of you, you can only do this, my experience, face-to-face. Most of you walk into meetings late. Some of you do. This is why we're such sticklers in starting on time in these classes. It shows respect to each other. For those who always walk in late, sorry, it's disrespectful. It causes people to shut down. If you have a device sitting there in every meeting, and when someone's about to talk to you, you say, oh, bzz, I gotta pick this up. They're not gonna be offended. Very disrespectful, and it shuts people down. So learn to block out time where you sit and talk to someone and listen without a device on the table. It builds relationships, and it will make it a lot easier for you to figure out what you believe, act in a way that adds value. You cannot do that alone. You need relationships. I would conclude with two sayings, which would probably alarm some of you. First one that I stole about 35 years ago, and I'll keep stealing it. It's a riddle. How many legs does a cow have if you call its tail a leg? You got this one? How many legs does a cow have if you call its tail a leg? The answer is 4. Just because you call its tail a leg does not make it a leg. Okay? And the point of this is, lots of the discussions we're in today, people say, just assume blank. Or there's an underlying assumption in what they're saying. If the assumption is stupid or faulty or doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense. And the rest of the discussion doesn't make sense. Be willing to question assumptions. And when I talked about what we knew 35 years ago or 30 years ago in '83, question those things. Things are not necessarily the way everybody assumes they are. And if it doesn't make sense to you, it probably doesn't make sense. Don't be afraid to ask. Second, not everything that counts can be counted. And not everything that can be counted counts. Say that again, because I like this one. Not everything that counts can be counted. And not everything that can be counted counts. Values, ideals, integrity, doing the right thing matters much more than things that can be measured. And don't forget that. You all are role models for people in your company, in your community, and this is a very critical thing that I think you need to model. Last comment I make. The problems of the world over the next 25 years, sadly, and this will shock you, are not going to be solved by the governments. And the reason for this is they don't have any money anymore. They really don't. They're going to have to be solved by people like us, you, us. So pick a cause, pick something you have a passion for. You don't need to quit your job to do it, but pick something in your community, something you believe in that you have a passion for, and get involved. The skills you bring as a business leader or a nonprofit leader are immensely valuable, much more than the money you give. Get involved. It will make a difference in the world. You have a very bright future, all of you. And I think for some of you, you may think you're in the end of the game, but I think you got a long way to go. People are living much longer. There's a lot more you can do. The most significant thing you do in your life may be the next thing you do. If you're true to your values, your principles, and convictions, if you never compromise your integrity in the hopes of success, I don't know how much more money, power, or status you're going to have, but I do think you're going to feel like a big success, and I think that's all that will matter. Congratulations, and thank you, all of you, and congratulations again.